Reports now suggest that Russian forces are advancing faster and more decisively than before, especially in the Zaporozhye region. This progress makes it increasingly difficult for Western governments to maintain the narrative that the war is at a stalemate or that Ukraine is on the verge of turning the tide. The reality on the ground shows something very different. The Russian military is not weakening, it is growing, both in strength and manpower. This expansion hints at the possibility of a much larger offensive, perhaps even a push all the way to the Dnipro River. And if that happens, it marks not just a setback for Ukraine, but the collapse of the entire Western project built around the war. A force that is simultaneously advancing and increasing its manpower is not losing. It is preparing for something bigger. And Western leaders understand this. They know that admitting the truth would mean admitting that the war never matched the rhetoric used to justify it. If Ukraine is pushed back into Russia's orbit, the war may effectively come to an end. For the Ukrainian people, it may even bring relief. But politically, it would be a crushing defeat for NATO, the European Union, and the United Kingdom. The United States stands in a different position, largely because Donald Trump has already distanced Washington from the conflict. Yet even so, America's earlier involvement was structured in a way that made it difficult for any president to withdraw cleanly. The pivotal moment came when Trump refused to give Kiev a security guarantee, a commitment that would have triggered a direct clash between NATO and Russia. By saying no, he prevented a wider war, leaving Europe with nothing but desperate measures. Leaders like Emmanuel Macron talk about sending French troops to Ukraine, but without U.S. president. Backing such moves would change nothing and likely cost lives. Historically, European powers have relied on the idea that if a crisis becomes severe enough, America will be forced to intervene. They seem to be gambling on that again. But even if the U.S. were pulled into the conflict, it would not change the fundamental military reality. Russia holds escalatory dominance in the region. You cannot print tanks, troops, air defenses, or integrated logistics systems. And without these, the West cannot win a direct confrontation. That is why the war continues despite the lack of strategic progress. It persists because powerful financial and political interests, particularly those centered around London, Paris, and Wall Street, are clinging to a long-shot hope. They believe that if the war drags on long enough, Russia might face internal crisis. From there, they imagine using Russia against China, just as Ukraine was used against Russia. It is a dream built on desperation rather than reality. This mindset explains why peace was derailed in 2022. Agreements were already nearly complete when Boris Johnson arrived in Kiev, urging Ukrainian leaders not to sign and promising Western support if they continued fighting. The result was catastrophic. Millions of Ukrainian men killed, missing, or permanently injured, industries destroyed, and an entire generation lost. And now, the Western narrative is collapsing. They will not be able to rewrite the history of this conflict. They will not be able to pretend that the war was simply Russian aggression without context. And many of today's European leaders may not survive politically once the full truth emerges. Economically, the consequences for the West are severe. The financial system is starving for collateral, relying increasingly on money creation backed by nothing, on the path toward inflation and social instability. Europe, NATO, and the UK are facing a dismal future. Ironically, Ukraine may recover faster than they will once the war ends. With its population reduced, its industry destroyed, and its society at rock bottom, investment from Russia, China, and BRICS nations could rebuild it more rapidly than many expect. Examples from other countries show what is possible when resources are directed toward development rather than war. Azerbaijan, for instance, built thousands of kilometers of highways, hundreds of bridges, and major tunnels in less than 5 years, with a relatively small investment. Ukraine has the natural wealth, agricultural potential, and strategic position to become a major economic hub if it is allowed to develop for its own people instead of being used as a geopolitical weapon. Recent Russian strikes on Ukraine's power grid suggest preparations for a major offensive. For years, Russia avoided destroying the electrical infrastructure entirely, so doing it now indicates a tactical decision rather than frustration. Ukraine is largely without power, many thermal plants have been rendered irreparable, and this may be the precursor to a decisive push westward. Meanwhile, the drone attacks launched by Ukraine against Russian refineries generate dramatic footage online but achieve little in practical terms. Ordinary Russians barely notice them, fuel lines are non-existent, and daily life continues normally. In contrast, Ukraine is now operating in near darkness. The timing shows clear strategic intent. Russia may be preparing for the final phase of the war.